Right, thank you Ian and Erin and Jean. So I'll try to build on Jean's presentation and look what happens if you want to turn these conservation targets into real conservation action on the ground. The way I see things is that you have global targets. It's quite an achievement to have broad direction that nations can follow and pull in the same direction. So a further bonus if one has a political endorsement at a national scale, and if you can convert those targets into spatial priorities, and even further if those spatial priorities are perceived with a degree of credibility and salience and legitimacy in a particular country. And then those spatial targets needs an implementation agent that's receptive and responsive and that can allocate resources and make something happen. So we're going to look at a South African case study, go through those steps very briefly, and then I want to conclude with 4 take-home messages for you. Yeah? Political endorsement, Jean has mentioned that we've gone through a process 2005 and 6 in South Africa, whereby by senior level government officials from a number of policy sectors engaged and really grappled with this issue of how many rivers and wetlands can we put aside for high level of conservation. That's a very important step. It's for these officials to take that level of ownership. It was not developed by an NGO or a donor agency. It was actual officials that made an effort to come up with a 20% target for freshwater ecosystems in South Africa. And there's the policy paper that was published, but it's a process that's more important than the paper. We've also got, as Jean has mentioned, the spatial priorities to satisfy that 20%. Actually, 2% of rivers came out and 38% of wetlands. And if you zoom in to any one of those green patches, you see that there's a huge amount of underpinning data, lots of data that can now be used in the implementation phase. So if we look at underpinning data and take one of the implementation agencies, and in this case South African National Parks, an agency that's responsible for 90 national parks, 4 million hectares, almost 3% of South Africa's land area. We look at that agency at its corporate level, the whole agency and their responsibility, national level responsibility, but also at each of the parks with the park manager and rangers, because you have to craft different messages for each of those levels. How will they do in implementing and their contribution to implementing that conservation target? We've used that underpinning data to come up with a number of messages. First, at the estate level, the conservation agency. There are some of the statistics, don't have to bother too much. One of the messages is that, as Jean has mentioned, that river types are largely or not well represented in the national parks. Less than 50% of the river types in South Africa occur in any form of protected land, and 38% in the national parks. The second one, if you look at the graph, is that not all rivers in protected areas are ecologically intact. It is better for a river to be in a protected area, but 24% of the length of rivers in protected areas are from between moderately to critically modified. And these were important messages for managers, senior managers in the organization. A further one was that the important water production areas, the 8% of the land that produces 50% of the water, overlaps very poorly with protected areas. Only 16% with any form of protection, and the national parks contribute only 1% of those areas. Again, a strong message, and this message is now influencing park expansion strategies in South Africa. Then we go to the park level. Now, working with park managers and rangers with the same underpinning data, and made them realize that freshwater ecosystems are biodiversity features in their own right, and they form a very important part of the conservation mandate of the park, whereas in the past very often they were just seen as convenient game watering areas or attractive places for building a tourist lodge. The second one is the systematic data help to provide a degree of the regional conservation significance of a feature. Now you can say that the particular river that flows through a park is part of a particular river type, and we can look at how much of that river type occur in national parks, protected areas, and how important it is for the park to put effort into the protection of that feature. A further point was that the park level assessment showed up some differences, some inaccuracies in the national scale planning, and should be used to feed back and improve the national level database. So now just the 4 learning points. The first one, through actually going through all these phases, if we want to really give effect to global and national conservation targets, we've got to think of systemic conservation governance. There are many horizontal and vertical dimensions that need to be connected. As you can see there, between science and policy, global, national, and local. Across the sectors, water, biodiversity, land use, agriculture. And those connections are largely people connections. We've got a South African National Biodiversity Institute that plays an intermediary role and has done a wonderful job to try and connect people, national government, provincial government, scientists, and policymakers. And through the dialogues, we're starting to see a measure of effect, of giving effect to these targets. The second learning point is that having quantitative targets, whether they are accurate or not, and regional scale, in our case national scale biodiversity plans or conservation plans, biodiversity assessments, has been an incredibly useful tool, and especially because of all the extensive stakeholder engagement that's gone into the products, the peer review publications, the attractive and professional maps that Jean and company has produced, contributed to this perception of salience, legitimacy, and credibility, and an air of authority. So the products were perceived with, as high-standing products, and park managers and senior executives took notice of it. So it certainly helped a lot to advance the strategic conversation around river conservation in South Africa. The third one is, notwithstanding this air of authority, these products are not always accurate. We found the products to be very accurate for rivers, because rivers have had some traction over a number of years. For wetlands, less so. You see there at the bottom right of the map indicate a cluster of wetlands. On closer inspection, that was the wettest that we could find in that arid park. On the other hand, all the black dots are small spring-fed wetlands that were not part of the national data lake. So local level assessments could help to adaptively improve these national and global level maps that we have. And the fourth one is that social factors play a very important role. We've listened a lot to technical advances, but social factors were really incredibly enabling. From a senior government official that brokered the cross-sector policy discussions, a person that played a key role in a key phase of these developments. We had in-house aquatic scientists in sand parks that could absorb the products and translate them for park managers. We had park managers that were receptive and supportive to the new freshwater ideas, and a core group of scientists that stuck together over a number of years to keep diffusing the new products at various levels in different organizations. Those are all social factors. So my conclusion is that quantitative conservation targets and regional biodiversity assessment can serve as boundary objects. They are objects to facilitate engagement across multiple knowledge boundaries. Now, knowledge is from many sides of these boundaries can relate to the maps, and being a boundary object means it facilitates a discussion that helps to connect the top-down targets and the bottom-up action. And maybe my main message is we need the technology and the technical products, but it's ultimately the social connectedness across these horizontal and vertical dimensions that give us a effective conservation on the ground, and that relates to positively motivated people, or depends on positively motivated people, patient persistence over a number of years, and a degree of serendipity. We had these, government officials, a park manager, and people in place that you cannot plan for. So a lot of soft issues are also part of a critical part of conservation planning.